The teaching text for today is 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong and clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, but if I deliver up my body to be burned and have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. And when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these things. But the greatest of these is love. You may be seated.
Well, good morning. It's good to be with you guys. If I've not met you or had the pleasure of doing so, my name is David Black. I'm the campus pastor here at Grace. And something we say often, and we mean it, is that following Jesus is costly. And in fact, if you were just to be curious of like, hey, what would be a great relational exercise if you had the courage to do it, or if you know the person next to you or someone else in the room, just ask them at some point in time, hey, I'm curious, what has following Jesus cost you? And then just listen. And the reason I bring that up is because I think sometimes we think that, man, if I follow Jesus, this means I have to fill in the blank, or this means that I'll have to change this about my life. I think sometimes we think that we're the only ones who it would cost, and that's not true. It's always costly. But we say this, even though it's costly, it doesn't have to be lonely. And so our hope and our prayer for you is if you're considering Jesus or exploring him, or if you're already following him, that this morning you would actually connect with somebody else. You could ask questions, travel with them, and that you might just know that you're not alone in that journey. We are wrapping up a 6-week series in which we've been in 1 Corinthians 13. And so if you've been here, if you've had perfect attendance, we don't take perfect attendance, but if you've had the perfect attendance, you've heard the passage that Michael read this morning for us, read at least 6 times. And again, if you've only started coming since we've been in this series, you're probably thinking, does this church read any other scripture verse, or is this the only chapter that we read together? It's not, but it's the one that we've been in. We've been studying love for a couple reasons. The first is that our culture loves love. We talk about it all the time, and we've even talked over the last few weeks together of how often it's expressed at holidays, especially coming up for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Obviously, holidays, St. Patrick's Day was actually all about letters from a jail back and forth, and you can look into that. Valentine's Day, a couple other areas in our culture where we just lift up love, movies, books, songs. It's everywhere. We love love, but it's also missing from a lot of life. It's missing from our families often. It's missing from our culture. It's definitely missing from our politics. It's missing from all kinds of things. It's even missing from churches. And so we just kind of dove into this, and to catch you up to speed again, because we're wrapping up today, we've said that some of this comes because love is confusing. We use the same word for love when it comes to our pets as we do when it comes to people. And oftentimes, if we're to be honest, it's easier to love our pets at times than our people. And we use the same word across the board, but in Greek, in which the Bible was written, they actually had an advantage to today. And they actually used more than one word for love. They used 4 different words. And the primary word that they used was eros. So we get our word erotic from that, and it just means romantic love. And so they would talk about romantic love in all of their books and all of their songs. It was the highest form of love. It was the most common phrase for love and word for love up until about the time of 50 AD. In fact, 50 AD, something happened across the entire Roman world, which was Greek-speaking. The entire Roman world, all the way from Great Britain, which we call now, over to Turkey, right? That whole range began to change the word that was used for love. And it actually changed from being the most common word as romantic love, or eros, to this word here, agape. Agape means a commitment that ascribes worth to someone else at the cost of oneself. And historically, people have looked into this and said, well, why is that the case? And whether they're followers of Jesus or not, historians have said the reason this occurred is because of a small group of followers of about 50 or so that grew and grew and grew and grew, and they called themselves, actually they didn't call themselves this, the culture called them little Christs, little Jesus followers. And said, we don't know what's going on in that group over there, but here's what we know: the way that they love one another and love people who are not like them and love their enemies and love across social boundaries and even economic boundaries is insane. And it caused the entire world to shift how they thought and talked about love. And we've just been saying, hey, we feel like that could happen again and needs to happen again. So we've been asking this question for 6 weeks. We've been saying, is there a love better than this? Better than what? Well, better than the one that we watch about, or we watch in movies and sing about and read about and dream about. Is there a love, a different kind of love, that needs to make its way to the forefront again in our life? We've been studying this chapter in 1 Corinthians 13. And this chapter sounds poetic at weddings, but it's not written to be read at weddings. It's actually written to a church that was very impressive. They had great speakers. They had great worship services. Their ministries were fantastic, and yet they stunk when it came to love. They were suing each other. They were breaking into divisions. They were doing all kinds of crazy things. I know no churches ever do that, right? But like they were just at each other's throat. And the guy who's writing, his name is Paul. He's one of the first missionaries to the early church. In fact, he's writing to this church in Corinth and going, guys, you're missing the biggest thing. You've got all of the churchy stuff, but you're missing the central core of what it means to be defined as a follower of Jesus, and that's agape. And so he begins to talk very sternly in some ways to them and saying, let me show you a better way of church than what you're doing. And he starts talking about love. And the text that we are wrapping up with today, we've been working our way kind of all through this. I'll read for you. It starts in chapter 8. It's the longest of the text. That doesn't mean it's going to be the longest of the sermons, so you can, take a sigh of relief there. The longest of the text that kind of winds its way around begins in verse 8. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. Verse 9, for we know in part, we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. Verse 12, for now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now, faith, hope, and love abide. Some versions say remain. These three, but the greatest of these is love. What is Paul talking about? I was looking around on Google this week, and I ran across a couple animals for you. The one on your left here is a mayfly. And the one on your right is a Greenland shark. Does anyone have an idea of what these two have in common? Or actually antithesis of one each other? They're very specific animals. Anybody know? The mayfly has the shortest lifespan of any creature. Anywhere from 5 minutes to 24 hours. If you make it to 24 and you're a mayfly, you're an old grandpa, right? Can you imagine? Like, think about that. The entire lifespan of this mayfly is like, hey, that's it. Like, just It's like, I'm here. Like, and whatever day you show up on, that's the weather for your life, right? That's it. It's a rainy day, your whole life is rain. That's it. Sunny day, you don't even know rain exists, right? But that's the mayfly. The Greenland shark is the opposite. So it's the what? It's the longest living that we know of. Actually, there's a little mollusk, but I don't even think that thing's sentient. So we're not counting that because they're still alive. We think this thing can go for 10,000 years, which I'm like, whose job is it to check in on it in 10,000 years? Is that a role? Anyway, marine biology. The Greenland shark, 800 years, around 800 years. It does that, by the way, slowing its metabolism, which I'm not sure how that helps because as I'm 40, mine is slowing, and I don't think it's helping me live any longer, right? But it lives a long time. I don't think these creatures know about each other, right? Because if they did, they'd be like, what's going on? Why do I bring this up? Because I think the question that we all ask ourselves, and the question even that Paul begins to wrestle with a little bit today, is if it comes down to agape, like loving someone else and ascribing worth to someone else at a cost to yourself, right? What is the lifespan of that? What is the lifespan of love? Is it 5 minutes? Or is it 800 years? And here's what Paul's trying to get across to you and me, and I think what God would actually want us to learn a little bit, is that when it comes to love, agape love, God's type of love, is forever. Forever. That there's no lifespan on it. You say, well, why is that important that we'd understand? Because I think when you talk about forever sounds a lot like Disney, right? You're like, oh, but not reality. And here's why I think it doesn't sound like reality to you and me. It's because most of us, we've lived in this world. And if you've lived in this world for any amount of time, here's what tends to happen. This world will make us believe that every love leads to a funeral. I mean, if you love someone or something really well, whether it's short or whether it's long, at some point that comes to an end. And for most of us, as we get older, as adults, do you know what we do? We just kind of accept that as the truth. We just go, yeah, every love has a funeral. So we just got to what? Deal with it. And yet Paul would say, no. No, actually what you thought about and believed as a young child is reality. Love is forever. You see, all of us long for a forever type of love. All of us do. We long for a forever kind of love. That's the first point. And see, Paul writes in verse 8, he says this, love never ends. There's actually a decent translation of it. And some of your versions say love never fails. That could be interpreted two different ways, like, right, break down or end. But the word here, fails or ends, actually is the same word that you would use for a petal or a flower that's wilting. So as the petals fall off and the thing dies off, we would go, oh, it's coming to the end of its life. And Paul's going, no. It never fades. It never wilts. And I know I just made fun of them, but they actually kind of get this thing right. And it's this right here, Beauty and the Beast. Maybe, yes. All right. What's the picture here? Right? We've all seen this? Yes? Maybe? Yeah? Right? Live action or not? Right? Depending on where you are. I prefer the animated one, but that's a whole, we can talk about that later in the foyer. There's a rose, and the beast is under a curse. And if he can't get someone to love him for who he really is, by the time the last, petal falls, he will remain a beast forever, right? You see, all the love that we can fathom has some sort of wilting, but all of us, deep down inside, we long for a flower that doesn't fade. We long for a love without an expiration date. A guy named G.K. Chesterton, I don't have a quote with me this morning, but he was talking about this. And somebody said to him once that love is blind. And he goes, no, love is not blind. Love seeks to always bind itself to something else. He says love is bound to the lover. It seeks to attach itself to another. And in fact, the more that you seek to bind yourself, the less blind you actually are. He says we're always looking to try to connect ourselves to something that lasts. In fact, all of our songs actually sing about this. I just brought some lyrics for you of different things over the ages, but like we sing about this type of love. You mean the world to me. Oh, I know. I've found in you my endless love, right? Here's another one. I love you always and forever, near and far, closer together, everywhere I will be with you. Okay, yep. This will be an everlasting love. Oh, yes, it will now. We sing about it. We long for it. We dream about it. We have movies that reflect it. And yet, we don't really seem to find it. What's fascinating is this is not only relegated to our songs. In fact, if you look at the collection of songs in the Bible, we call them psalms, but you'll find a psalm in Psalm 136 that starts like this. It says, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Give thanks to the God of gods, for his steadfast love endures forever. Give thanks to the Lord of lords, his steadfast love endures forever. And if you continue on in this psalm, you don't have to do it right now, but if you just read it this week, every other line is the same. Forever, 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 forever. Just keeps going. If you have a relationship, you don't have to be in a relationship to know this, but if you have a relationship with somebody, whether it be a parent to a child or a grandmother to a grandparent or a grandkid or a spouse to another, or even just friends, and you communicate with one another, there's this general rule that people say you should never do or you shouldn't do when you're talking with one another. Does anyone know what this is when you're communicating? You should communicate with each other, but you should very rarely and try as best as you can to avoid using superlatives. Does anyone know what that is? Always. Never, right? So if you want to communicate, again, this may be why you're here this morning. I don't know, right? But if you're arguing or if you're in a debate or if you're talking with someone or if you're just discussing something, right? You should never go, hey, you never do this. You always, you know what your problem is? Every day, every time, for all eternity, here's what you do, right? That's not, right, a productive way to communication. Do you know that that's how God always talks with us? Isn't that interesting? That the very thing that we ought never use because of who we are as people being finite, God has the audacity to say that when it comes to your relationship with me, it's always forever and never. Jesus looks at his disciples and says, I'm with you always. He says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. See, every time you open the Bible, God talking to you and me, it's in superlatives. Forever, for always, for eternity. And we go, oh. Because the way that it doesn't work for us seems to work with him. There seems to be, what Paul is saying here is that there is a forever and an always type of love. You see, again, if you just go off of human relationships, longing forever type of love will make you feel foolish in this world, right? You go, man, I was a fool. I should have known. It always ends up this way. But what the Bible has the audacity to say, and what God has the audacity to claim, is that you're not wrong to long for an ever type of love. You're actually onto something. You see, if love is forever, if there is a love that lasts forever, if eternity is a world of love, as one famous preacher wrote in a sermon, if eternity is a world of love, especially agape, here's why that matters. Because it means that you could actually live for the benefit of people. You're not foolish to live for people in this world. Because people and personal relationship matter in eternity. Without getting too deep in the weeds, like some religions teach that eventually, if we just like live here enough and get rid of desire, we'll be absorbed into this impersonal whole of goodness. Well, if the future is impersonal, why would I even waste my time with people today? Right? If all this is just going to burn, or if after we die there's nothing, listen, trees last longer than people. That Greenland shark lasts more than people. There are corporations that have lasted longer than individuals. Why in the world would I care more about someone else in my life if there's not something eternal about that relationship, right? Also, this would inform us, like if agape love is forever, then you're not crazy to live passionately. You're not crazy to cry with people in the midst of loss. You're not crazy to celebrate and to live for all it's worth. Why? Because if it's love and if it's agape, then it's forever. Otherwise, you might as well just be a rock, right? Be an island, cut yourself off, live stoically. But if agape is real, and if agape lasts forever, then you're not nuts, and you're not a fool, and you're not crazy. Now, maybe you're sitting here and you're going, all right, Paul or God or even David at this point, like if you're talking to me about this forever type of love and you're saying it's not crazy and I can live for people and I can live passionately, you might be sitting here and going, well, I could do that and I don't have to be a Christian. And I would say, you're right. You don't have to be a follower of Jesus to live for people. You don't have to be a follower of Jesus to live passionately. All kinds of people do. But I do think that you don't have to be a Christian, but I don't think you'll also be consistent either. You say, well, why? Because here's what we found, and here's what Paul's pointing out, that our best is not that kind of love. Like all the best love that we got, it's not that best kind of love at all. In fact, that's point 2. Our best is not that kind of love. He says this in verse 10 when he starts talking about part, and verse 12 as well. Notice he says, for we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. He uses another metaphor, talking about like a mirror being dim. He says, for we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. The word part here is kind of like piece or fraction. He's saying we only have a fraction of what we think when it comes to love. The things that we experience here on this world are just a piece of it. And he goes, our world it's kind of like relationally, we're like looking through a mirror and it's kind of cloudy. When I was reading this, I thought about if you ever try to be on a Zoom call and you get that notification if you have really bad internet that says your internet is unstable, which of all the phrasing, I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do about that. I'm unstable. My internet's unstable, right? I think this call's unstable. What are we going to do? Right. And so it's this idea of like, you know, if the person gets stuck or pixelated, it's like all of our relationships and all of the things that we experience on this world, Paul's saying, here's this, it's just a fraction of what eternity is. It's just a part of what lies ahead in the future when it comes to agape love. It's just a little bit. It's all it is. And so he's basically saying, when it comes to your relationships and when it comes to experiencing love, at some point, you're only dealing with one part and you're always just in the dark a little bit. It's going to feel that way. And so your marriage, your friendships, your family, all of these are valid types of love. You know, sometimes, in fact, I've had a couple of people this series walk up to me and say, hey, I want to love God. I just actually still love my kids. Can you help me? And I'm like, you should love your children. Right? Or more specifically, I'm not picking on you, but it's a common question. Sometimes with young adults, they'll come up and be like, I want to love God, but I also think I love this girl or this guy. And I'm like, okay. They're not always mutually exclusive, right? You can love other people and love God. It's not replacing one or the other. In fact, the Bible would say that marriage, family, and friendship, they're not lesser loves, they're just partial. They're just pieces of a grander agape love. You see, in a positive sense, this means that we'll always be somehow retooling and reshaping what we understand agape to be, right? This has happened for many of us in this series. We go, I think I'm loving, and then we read 1 Corinthians 13, and we go, I'm not loving, right? Monday and Tuesday happen, and you're like, I think I'm loving. And then next week, you're like, Sunday again, man, I'm not loving, right? No matter how many times you read this, you're like, I just can't get over the fact that I think I got it, and then I don't. And yet, what Paul's almost saying is that's going to be your lived experience. Part of following Jesus is retooling and rearranging your heart around what agape is. That's how it works. It's a little bit like paleontology, you know? Yeah, why not? This picture right here is a fossil, okay? This is the iguanodon's, piece of the iguanodon. When we first found this back in the day, everyone expected they knew exactly what this was. If you were to guess what piece of an animal this would be, what do you think it would be? Tooth, maybe? They thought it was the horn, okay? So 1850s, this is the iguanodon right there, and there's its lovely horn. Until we found a bigger iguanodon skeleton, and here's what we found out. Turns out it's its thumb, right? A thumb spike. And you're like, wait, what? Can you imagine that? Some guy's like digging, what skeleton is? Oh, we have made a grave error, right? Call all the museums, take it off the head, pop it on his hand, right? Which leads to this meme, one of my favorite memes of all time. If you talk dumb, you get the thumb. And I guess that's how they thought about them using this, right? Upright. And so they were like, oh man, we got to rewrite all the books on paleontology. Here's the thing. Today, this is what we now think it looks like, which is way less cooler than it used to look like in the 90s. And I think that's just because our movies in the 90s were like so over the top, right? We're just like, our dinosaurs have to match that too. But here's what we think it is now. Oh, it's back to all fours, and its thumbs are just kind of clickety-clackety on the ground, right? That's what it does, right? What's going on? They're going, hey, we keep thinking we got it, but we got to keep changing it. Listen, as a follower of Jesus, that's what it is with agape. You're going to get married, and you're like, I got it. And you're going to don't. You're going to have children, and you're like, I got it. But you don't. You know what you're going to do? You're going to be like, I got it. And then you're going to show up at church, and you really don't got it, right? By the way, other people don't either. And so there's a sense in which what an old guy named Augustine once talked about. He said, like, what we need to do is reorder our loves, right? I'm constantly going like, oh, my kids are the best. And then it's like, oh, no, actually, agape is up here, and they're here. And so it's not replacing other loves with God's love. It's just going, those are the pieces that I have to put together and make sure his is up top. So in a negative sense, here's what this means. In a negative sense, we're going to always be tempted to look at some earthly love and want eternity out of it. You're going to want to look at your spouse and go, I want eternal love out of you. And your spouse is going to go, what do you want for dinner, right? What do you want to eat tonight? I don't know, right? You got something in your teeth. That's marriage, right? Like, that's how it works. You're going to look at your kids and you're going to go, I want eternal love out of you. And they can't bear the weight. You're going to look at your friends and you're going to say, I want forever love out of you. And they're going to go, we can't do that. You're going to look at your church family and go, all of you are supposed to always love me in every circumstance. And you can't get that out of a group of people. It's just a part of it. It's just a partial part of it. And if you stack things on top of other loves and expect them to be the love, it will crumble under the weight. And so some of us here, maybe some of you, are constantly beating yourself up because you're trying to assemble agape love and you're like, man, I'm the worst agape lover in the world. And really, you're going, hey, that's actually just growth in following Jesus. And others of us, we're walking in this room and we're angry because the people and the things that we've put all of our forever love on can't support it. And we go, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with me? And the truth is, it's just a piece of it. just a piece of it. Well, are you saying then, David, that we're ever going to really ever expect the whole thing here? Are we not going to find it? In fact, writing about this kind of negative aspect of it, C.S. Lewis put it this way, that eros is driven to promise what it can't perform. Right? And so I'm going to look for romantic love to do that. A guy named William Morris, he wrote a poem. In that poem, he entitled it, "Love is Enough." And it's very great. It says, "Love is enough, though the world be a waning, and the woods have no voice but the voice of complaining." I don't know what was going on in his life right now at that point, but apparently a lot of complaining. "Though the sky be too dark for dim eyes to discover," and he goes on and on and on and on. One of my favorite reviews of the poem is this right here by Crystal in 2016 or 2017. "Love is enough. It is not." 1 star. 1 star. Some of us, we get to that point, right? We go, okay, if we can't find it in this world, and everything's just there, like, is John just giving up on life of ever really hopefully finding a forever type of love here now? And the answer is no. Paul says something interesting in verse 10. He says this, "For we know in part and we prophesy in part." And then he says this, "But when the perfect comes," right? What's he saying? Yeah, there's some debate about this in the world of theology that I'll spare you, but for our best purposes and what I think is the right, honestly, view of the text, that what he's talking about here is eternity. When God has his way and God has his say. When all the wrong is undone and when everything is right. So when he calls it the perfect, he's not talking about a person, like the perfect person earthly wise, or the perfect environment. We think that. We think, oh, if I find the right person or the right environment, then he's going, no, one day, someday, God is going to make things right. And when that comes, there's going to be something else. In fact, the word here for perfect, again, I'm not just throwing around Greek. It's the word teleos. It's where we get our word telescope from. And what does a telescope do? Well, it allows you to see far off distances, right? So if we were to go to a observatory, we might go at night. It's the best time to see the universe. We would go at night, and they would open up this big dome, and they'd point this giant ocular lens at the universe, and they'd move it around. And you, as a little tiny squishy human on a rock that's revolving around a fireball, right? You stick this little tiny lens of an eye, which needs contacts or bifocals, depending on your age, right? You stick that up to the tiny side of this giant lens, and you see a galaxy, which you can't travel to. Isn't that crazy? And we go, whoa. Then we go have half-price appetizers at Applebee's afterwards. Right? We have this existential experience with the universe at something we would never be able to get to in a lifetime. And we say, wow, look at that out there. That's what he's doing here. He's going, hey, guys, would you come with me for a second? He's like, guys, come on. Let's get in our little observatory of this section of Scripture. And he goes, I want you to take your heart, and I want you to take your heart and place it up to the small end of this giant lens. And I want you to look with me as far as we can see, way out into eternity, past 10,000 years, past 20,000 years, past the need for years. Okay, we stopped counting a long time ago. And I want you to see what I see. And do you know what I see? I see agape. And it's still there. And so you're not a fool. And you're not crazy. And everything in this world is partial. Here's what he's saying. It's this, that when it comes to love, God offers a future kind of love today. You say, really? Yeah, he goes, verse 12, he says, for now, we see in a mirror dimly, but then, what's then? Well, way out at the other end of the telescope. What's at the end of the telescope? Then, face to face. The words literally here translated are, this is gross, mouth to mouth. He's saying there's an intimacy and a relationship and a love that exists in eternity that is so close and so real. It's exactly what your heart desires right now. He's saying that type of love out there. Do you know what makes eternity great? This is what he's saying. What makes eternity great is not just that everyone will be there that you know. What makes eternity great is an embrace. It's an embrace of the God who made the universe. That's what he means. In fact, when we talk about face or face-to-face, when the Bible talks about face, it's literally the word presence. And writing about this, a guy named David in a song, he's right, when I awake, I will see you face-to-face, God. He's talking about when he passes away, when he dies, he's like, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to see you for real. Like I'm going to know you, like intimately, and I'll be satisfied. Later on, talking about the end of the world and the end of the universe, and the end of all things, the book of Revelation puts it this way. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. What are they talking about? They're talking about there's going to be a relationship so close. That's why he says, I will be fully known even as I am fully known right now. Or I will fully know the way that I'm known now. Here's what he's saying. He's like, the way that God knows you. God knows you. He made you. He knows you better than you know yourself. He knows you right now. He's saying, right now, I only get a little bit of that when it goes the opposite direction. I'm trying to figure out who is God and what has he done and how much does he love me. And I see what he says in the Bible and I kind of know what he says he's done, but I don't really fully get. He's like, it's going to be reciprocal. You and him together. Tim Keller put it as only he can when he says this, to be loved but not known is comforting but superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear, right? Somebody who's close to you, knows you, but doesn't like you, antithetical to who you are, man, I don't want that, right? But to be fully known and truly loved is, well, a lot like being loved by God. That's what Paul's saying is the future. Now, okay, great, glad that's out there. He's saying, the reason you long for a forever love is because there is a forever God. And the reason agape love does not change is because God does not change. God is love. That's actually in the Bible. Not love being God. God is love. It is an inherent nature and quality of who he is. And we can get into the reason for that later. You can ask me about that. But look, he is agape love. It flows out of who he is. That's what's way off in the future. That's why faith ends. Faith ends because we'll see him. If you can see it, it's not faith, right? If I see it, I don't have to have faith or trust in it. It's not faith. Hope, right? That kind of security, what you're tying your life to, that's going to end. He goes, but you know what you get in eternity? Not faith, not hope. You get him. You get him. But what about now? What about today? Because we're not crazy to long for a forever type of love, right? And yet we live in a world where our best is not that. So am I just waiting around for eternity till I get that? Here's where the miraculous good news of Jesus comes in. Jesus. God, who exists in eternity, actually brought that love back in time into humanity's history so that we can taste it now. That's what's going on at the cross and resurrection. It is God who is outside of time, right, coming back in time and depositing it in our life and in our history, in a point in time. And then he goes, I want you to know this, and I want you to live this, and I want you to have this for your family and your friendships and your marriage and your life. I've used this illustration before if you've been to a funeral, but I think it's one of the best ones I got. I grew up in the 90s, and in the 90s there was futuristic ice cream. It's called Dippin' Dots. It's still around, right? And it's freeze-dried ice cream. But their tagline was, taste the future. And so I grew up in one of those families where we were always pinching pennies, and this isn't resentful, okay? This isn't a dig at my parents right now. So when we went to amusement parks, we didn't buy concessions. We certainly didn't spend $12 on freeze-dried ice cream, right? So we could taste the future, right? My dad would be like, I want you to taste the present, okay? And the present is economical. So the future's expensive, right? Which is true, by the way. Anyways, so you could go and you could sample the future of ice cream. By the way, they've been saying this is the future of ice cream for years. I can't wait. Maybe AI will get us there. I don't know, right? I think it's a gimmick. But the idea is that somehow right now you could have the joy and the privilege and the status of walking around in the Georgia heat. And people go, what is that? You're like, this? It's from the future. It's ice cream. Like, that's not ice cream. You're like, oh, it is. It's not like any ice cream I've ever seen, right? No, it's not. Why? Because it's from the future. You see, that's what God does with his love. You see, God's love is not just the future, it's from the future. And Jesus Christ picks it up and drags it back and plops it into our history and says, I want you to taste this. It's not like any love I've ever seen. You're right, it's not. It's from the future. And you can have it right now. Really? Is it $12? No, it's actually free at great cost. I covered it myself. Think about this, right? Just think about this reality. Sometimes if you go to a wedding, it's not uncommon, even today. There's an old English proverb that brides sometimes do. When it comes to a wedding, you need something old, something new, something what? Borrowed, something blue, right? What's fascinating is sometimes they'll borrow something from their family or from a friend or someone else's marriage. It's supposed to be good luck. What's interesting is when they stand up in front of you and they say their vows, and the bride goes, I will always love you. I'll always do that forever. And the groom goes, I will love you. I promise I'll never. They start using superlatives in front of all their friends and family, right? And even though it's the last time they're supposed to use superlatives in their communication with one another. But anyway, they're saying this to each other, I'll always and forever do that. Has it ever occurred to you that the thing that's borrowed is love? How could any human being stand up in front of someone else and say forever? Well, they have to be borrowing that love from somewhere else. Where are they borrowing it from? They're borrowing it from God. It's his. It's on loan to them. So that their best love, that's not a forever love because it's a humanity love, can somehow be a place where that forever love can be experienced and seen, right? Think of it this way. When you were younger, if you're married, or not, if you're married and you weren't married, if you're not married currently, if someone came from the future and said, hey, I'm from the future, that's who you should marry. You'd be like, what? We all kind of secretly want this, right? Could someone just tell me? Right? If someone came to the future and said, that's the job you should take, you'd be like, all right. This is the car you should buy. This is the house you should have. Here's what you should call your kids. How do you know? I'm from the future, meaning I've seen it play out, I know what's happening, and I've seen that company, it lasts. You should join it, it's great. It's gonna feed your family forever, it'll be wonderful, right? That person over there, they're not gonna let you down. You're like, that person? Yeah, that person. You should marry that person. Why? Because they're not gonna cheat on you, and in fact, they'll love you back, and you should see your kids, they're cute, right? That's what they're saying to you. You'd be like, okay. You go, well, how do I know you're from the future? And then, I don't know, newspaper, I don't know why we reverted back to that, but whatever, like, here, look, here's a photo of you. Oh, that is me, right? And yeah, here you are, here's your kids. Oh, okay, they're pretty great. Yeah, you should do it. At some point, you might go, all right. That is literally what God did. Jesus comes along and he goes, I'm from the future. I'd like to tell you about someone who will never let you down. I'd like to tell you about a love that's forever. And I'd like to tell you about someone who knows you better than you know yourself. And they'll never, ever leave you. And we go, how do I know? And he goes, because I'm here to die. And by the way, I'm going to come back to life. And when he comes back to life, they're like, I guess you're from the future, right? You see, John MacArthur put it well, and I think correctly, when he says this: love is the link God gives us to his eternal self. The God who made you, who knows you, loves you at cost to himself. And he wants you to believe him, not because he wants to control you, not because he wants to tell you all the things you can't do in life, not because he wants you to look like the perfect, no, he wants you to know him and be in a relationship with him, right? This whole heaven and hell thing, man, right? It's not who does the good list and gets in. It's, do you love God or don't you? And if you don't love God, he's not going to be like, I'm going to make you love me, right? He's like, do you love me? Do you want to be with me? And he's like, well, how would I know you? This is why Jesus puts it this way as the band comes back up, and this is where we're landing. This is why Jesus puts it this way. He even has this discussion with his disciples. He says, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. Why? Because I'm from the future. In my Father's house are many rooms. This is wedding language, by the way. Okay. If it were not so, what have I told you? If it weren't so, would I tell you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? And if I go prepare a place for you, I will come again, and I will take you to myself, that where I am, there you will be also in the future, with forever and a love. And Paul goes, man, Corinthian church, if you could get your arms around the one who's gotten his arms around you, that's the best thing ever. Right? So I'm going to pray, and as we just wrap up this series, I don't know what God's been teaching you, and I feel like he's been teaching me a ton. And if you're going, I'm trying to grow in love, and there's difficulty, and I don't know what to do, it would really help if someone prayed with me. There's people over there at those tables to your left that'd be willing to do that. If you're someone who's going, man, I don't know that love that's forever, I've actually been trying to find it in everything else, and I think I actually kind of want to make a step to trust that. In our culture, that's called 100 different things, right? Giving your heart to Jesus, accepting him into your life, surrendering yourself. It means laying down your life and living in his love. If that's what you want to do, we'd love to do that with you, and they're also on the left. If you're like, well, somewhere in between all of that, I'm trying to figure this out. Well, then we as a church want to do that with you. And so I'd encourage you, if you need to talk to someone before you leave, don't do that. Or do that. Don't leave without doing that. I'm just going to pray that God might make us be the type of people who are from the future, who have today embraced that type of love and borrowed it in our life, so that out of cost, honestly, to God himself, we might live sacrificially for one another and the world which he came to save. Yeah? Let's pray. Father, this morning we just do ask that our culture and our world would know the love of God. the love that you have for us, the love that came at cost of your life, which you willingly laid down. Lord, may we fully embrace it as a church. Lord, may we live it out in a way that causes others to take notice, not because we think we should be seen. But Lord, if there is a love that truly lasts forever, then we're fools to keep it to ourselves. Lord, for the person who's here and they've never really thought about you as a relationship of someone who will never let them down, and they're wondering how they could trust you, Lord, would you show them that you're trustworthy? Would you speak to them? Lord, thank you for the good news of Jesus, that you came to cover up and pay for all of our stupid failures and mistakes and rebellion in trying to force other things in this life to be that forever love, to try to find it in everything else besides you. Or would you teach us to love one another as you have loved us? In your name we pray. Amen.